and we'll get started. Okay. We're going to get started. So that was quite the snowstorm yesterday. I'm not usually very proud when I come up here and say I'm from Toronto, but I have to say, guys, that was not a snowstorm. Come on down and see what we're calling snowstorms these days. Anyway, it was really pretty. and it was nice to be able to blow the snow off the windshield with my little brush. So we're going to start this today with a little bit of housekeeping. I'm advised that there's a few newcomers that were not with us yesterday, and just make sure that we get your registration just with the people outside the front door there, so that we know who's been with us. The second thing is, you may not be aware, but there's a speaker's corner back in the back corner. This is an opportunity for you to make a comment. It's recorded, and you're not in a public setting, so you can make a comment. And the project team are going through the comments, and they're pulling out relevant things that need to be addressed by the project team. So if you feel the urge to make a comment at the speaker's corner, any one of these fine gentlemen along the wall here will help situate you and get things started. Okay. Okay. What's your name? Rowan. You want to stand up? He's your speaker's corner guy. Rowan. Thank you, Rowan. That's pretty much it. For the newcomers, exit signs are well marked. Look for the running man, the little green man. There's an exit just outside these doors. There's an exit obviously at the lobby, and there's a couple of exits down the left. Washrooms are to the left as you go outside the door. Anything else I need to add? No? Is that available? Okay, that's interesting. So Tony's just told me, if you haven't seen the simulation that he's built, it's really, really super cool. And it gives an on-the-ground perspective of what the road would look like once it's constructed. And I think there's a bridge, so you get a perspective of the bridge. And it's all 3D, not 3D, 360. It's very, very cool. If you want to run through, Tony's our guy. It's all set up over on the side there. But if you get a few minutes, maybe if you're in and around the focus groups and you want to take a few minutes. Dan, I don't mean to pick on you, but we also have an engineer from Dillon that has been involved in the design and construction of a road across the peatlands, or the muskeg as I call it, on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. Almost identical terrain. And I know there's a lot of people in the room that are asking questions about constructability across the peatlands. And Dan, do you want to stand up just so people get a look? Dan's around in the focus group area. If you want to ask questions, he's got some pictures that he can show. I don't know if they were progressive through construction, but it could give some people a little peace of mind that there is some competency in engineering and constructing a road in that kind of terrain condition. So just a couple of things that you can get your teeth into that are interesting as you're trying to maybe fill some time. And again, I'll shout out, we have a draw coming up at the end, and there's 2 draws, $500 each. One draw, you have to have your passport card filled, all five points have to be filled. So you have to visit each of the road project tables. You have to visit the Indigenous Affairs Canada table and the Mines table. And they'll give you a stamp. I think you have to ask a question or something to get the stamp, but I'm not quite sure about the details. There will be one draw. So all the passports will go into a bucket, and there will be one draw from the passports, $500. Then there's also the workbooks. I don't know if people have been using the workbooks, but there's a second draw for the workbooks. So if you've been actually taking notes, asking questions, or putting comments in the workbook, those are all going to go into a bucket, and there will be a draw, again, for $500. But you have to be here. Okay, so that's the rule. You can't be over at the mall, and your auntie picks up the prize for you. You actually have to be in the room. Okay. Today's going to be a great day. We're starting with a panel on We're going to be looking at the process we use to assess impacts to Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests. This is obviously of high importance to all of the communities, and it's going to be an important element of the environmental assessment and impact assessment documents that are submitted for your review. There will be baseline information available for the communities. We did a lot of the communities on the WSR project, socioeconomic baselines, which are feeding into the ATRI assessment. And we'll try and draw that link a little bit on the panel. But it's an interesting process. It's a dynamic process. And if people have any thoughts about that process, especially after the panel and you hear the people talking, please come up to any one of the panelists, because we're really interested in people's input from the communities about the process we're going to use, because it's really your process. You know, it's difficult for technical analysts to put themselves in your shoes. So the more we reflect you, the more you are reflected in that assessment, the more accurate and the better we'll be able to mitigate and accommodate. So we really, really, really would like input on that process. That's why we're giving it its own panel. So we're going to start that now. I'm moderating, so I'm just going to keep the mic, and we'll call up Bob and Rowena and Mark and Michelle, sorry. So I'm not going to do big, long introductions. I'm going to ask each of you to just give a little bit of an overview as to what you want to share in terms of what your involvement is in the road projects and things of that nature. We have Michelle from Dillon, who's working on Northern Road Link. We have Rowena, Martin Falls community member and project coordinator for the MFCAR project. We have Mark Nell, who's a senior impact assessment analyst and ATRI assessment and Indigenous knowledge analyst at Atkins Realis, working on the Webequay Supply Road. And we have Bob Baxter, everybody knows Bob, who's a community advisor. I think you're a lot more than that, but we'll leave it at that and ask you to embellish. So we'll start ladies first. Yeah, we each have a mic, so.
Good morning. Buzani. My name is Michelle Nasir. I'm with Dillon Consulting. I'm one of the consultants who's working on the Northern Road Link. I am part of this process in the way that I lead the Aboriginal and or treaty rights and interests assessment work that we're doing on the Northern Road Link, and I'm also leading our Indigenous knowledge program, which we spoke to yesterday. And I'll be around back there at the Expo booth with Dan to speak to more about the process and how we're undertaking it. A little bit of background on me. I myself am a settler here in Canada, and I'm originally born and raised in Pakistan, and now I call Canada and specifically outside of Toronto home. See, Chimigwach.
Bonjour, my name is Rowena Muniz. I'm from Martin Falls. I work as a community engagement coordinator for MFCAR. I've been doing it for about just over 2 years now, I believe. And part of that role is, or most of it, is just being a liaison kind of between the community and the MFCAR team. So helping gather input and opinions from the people of Martin Falls and relaying it back to the team. I've worked for Ogoki for like 25 years now. Well, since I was like 12, so. So, yeah, I was born and raised there pretty much.
Good morning. My name is Mark Nell, and as Steve was mentioning, I work for Atkins Realis. I've been with the company for about 3.5 years and have been working on Webequay Supply Road and Northern Road Link during that time. And my background is in environmental assessment and also working with communities on assessing potential impacts of projects on communities. So we are working through the environmental assessments for these projects with communities, as Steve was saying, to reflect best we can the issues and concerns from communities and how rights are expressed, and then applying that through the environmental assessment regulatory process. Thank you for having me today.
Good morning. There's somebody else supposed to be sitting on this panel, so I'm acting again. I was the backup. Anyway, my name is Bob Baxter. I was born in on the Albany River at the Macocobatan Lake. That's where I was raised, and went to residential school for a few years and didn't like that too much, so I went back to learn the ways of my parents. Went back to trapping and just knowing the land and stuff like that. So I'm involved in with Martin Falls Community Access Road. I've been involved in that for the last 7 years anyway. However long we had been working on it. And also I'm working with Martin Falls Community Land-Based, what is that? Community-Based Land Use Planning, with along with MNRF. So I guess I don't like calling myself anything, but I do know what about the land up north and the people that live up there. I've experienced all kinds of different seasons and the different teachings that went along with each season that was passed down by our parents. And I think I think it's imperative that people know that when First Nations people talk about their Aboriginal and treaty rights, I think it goes beyond that. Before the time of the treaties, these our people were free to roam wherever they want, hunting, fishing, and living in with their families and groups of wherever the seasons took them, if it was trapping or fishing and stuff like that. So there's this fine connection to the land that we cherish. Everything that belongs in that land that we depend on, what the Creator put there for us to survive. Honoring everything that was put before us. Just give you an example of what I mean. One of the teachings that my dad taught me was when you kill something, you have to honor it. So when I started trapping, he showed me how to tie that feet and the a beaver feet and tail, and put them and tie them up together, and put them back into the river, and to give thanks for that animal giving his life, and that fur for us to survive, for the meat for us to eat, and fur to sell and make things. At that time, it's just to make things out of beaver, moccasins and stuff like that, along with the moose, caribou and stuff. So it's that connection, that bond between Earth and our members that are so dear to us, that when we see any kind of development or disturbance coming into our areas, we question that, which I think is our right to do so, because we've been around for time immemorial in this country. And I think, aside from all these technical findings that we have, that's under the policies of the provincial and federal governments, that they want us to follow when these developments start, or in this case, the road that we're building, all the loopholes we have to go through, and all the consultants and experts we have to use in order for the government and the federal government to go on with the process with their guiding policies. But it's so important that we don't forget the indigenous people that are up there and their knowledge. I work with finding the indigenous knowledge of our members. Where the places that they hold dear and they don't want no development, and I listen to them, because I feel the same way about where I grew up. I don't like to see a Doug Ford coming out of the bushes bulldozer without that consent by all nations of non-territory. When it comes to development on our lands, we have to be involved. Because people have said, I've heard that, that there's nothing up there. If you're from Toronto, I've heard says, well, there's nothing up there. Nobody lives up there. There are a lot of good people that live up there, that have lived there for years. And that land is precious to us. I look at the place where our road's gonna go, or the rivers, where it's gonna cross the rivers and stuff like that, and I feel a heavy weight on my shoulders sometimes. This thing is gonna change the landscape of what we knew for, my dad's lifetime, and for my grandfathers and myself. So I think it's very crucial that we never lose sight of the knowledge that we have as First Nations people that sometimes are ignored by the governments and industry and stuff like that. And I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, for getting us started in a good way. Great remarks. What I picked up the most that was really super important is that you can have all the technical assessments and all the experts in the world, and you still can't replace knowledge of the land and experience on the land and understanding how the land is used and how a project might affect the use of that land. That has to come from the community. So we have Section 35 telling us that there are inherent rights. Check. We have under it telling us that it's the law that you must recognize and address those rights. Check. We have our guidelines from the federal government as to how to conduct an assessment on Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests. Check. We have the same thing from the province in our terms of reference. This is how to do impact assessment on Aboriginal and treaty rights. But we don't know what those rights and interests are until we talk to the community. And unfortunately, if you want to use that word, we're close to completion of the EAIA for Martin Falls Community Access Road, and we're very close to completing the EAIA for Webaway Supply Road. But we still have a lot of time on the Northern Road Link. And I think probably everybody in this room is aware that there are monies available to communities to conduct their own studies on Indigenous knowledge. And that's a really structured word, but basically how the community sees themselves on the land. And there are monies available to be able to conduct those studies. And in fact, you can even go further and you can actually conduct the impact assessment as a community. So you tell us what the impacts of the road might be on your use and rights. So it's a tricky subject because we are in a mode where we do rely on technical analysts. We do follow the checkbox approach to procedures and protocols in order to get regulatory approvals. It's just part of the hurdles that you have to get over. But I think what we want to do this morning with this panel and following up is to break that down to the human level, to the community member level. This isn't just a technical assessment. And we can't do the technical assessment, as I said earlier, as well as we should without the input from community members. And we're getting that input. Trust me, we're getting input from a lot of different sources. But more is always better. More is always better. Okay, so let's get on to the first question, if I can find it. One thing that you're probably very aware of is that all of these projects are Indigenous-led. And that brings a culture to the projects that's very different. And I've worked on literally hundreds of projects in my career, most of them very large. And I can't think of more than one or two that were Indigenous-led in addition to these three. So it's a unique opportunity to be able to shape the projects in the way that the communities want the projects to be shaped. And it's not just about ATRI assessment. There's been a lot of talk, in the focus groups and even just in the hallways about governance, meaning traditional laws, self-determination, control over operations of the road. People are talking about enforcement, policing, ensuring that lands are protected, that the access to lands are protected. These are all really important issues, and with an Indigenous-led project, there's a lot more opportunity to be able to address that. And that all gets rolled in, right? So it's an opportunity for everybody here to actually really make these projects different as Indigenous-led projects. So I'm going to throw the question first to Rowena. What does it mean to you as a community member that this project is being led by your community for your community? What's that mean? What's it?
I think it means ultimately that we have more control over our lands, and we're not just a bystander. We can lead it and put it in the direction that we want it to go. There's been a couple instances in the past where we had no say, There was like, they dammed at the beginning of the river. They made a dam there, which diverted the water away, and we have low water all the time. And then the provincial park they put in, Bob was talking about that last night. That I didn't know, I didn't even realize that either until last night, that we didn't have any say in that. And those are directly on our territory. So hopefully, like being proponents, that will not happen again. We'll have the ultimate say. Yeah.
Did you want to add, Bob? So let me just reiterate the question. So what's the difference and what's it mean that this is a project being led by the community for the community?
I don't know. I've always had a problem with that expression of community-led project. I think the reason I have I kind of look at it differently is, yes, we provide the okay to go through our lands. But in order to proceed in that direction, we have to negotiate funding and stuff like that with people that have the money to do what has to be done. But that question of what it means to the people, I think I was talking about that yesterday too at one of our breakout sessions, is that, when you're just used to and always on guard on what the government or development's going to do without the knowledge of First Nations people, you're always on guard for that thing to happen. Because when we started our land use planning and the word of the Ring of Fire, our members, some of the people I talked to, the first thing they said was, well, we might as well do what we can, because they're going to go ahead and do it without our permission, just like they did with parks and stuff like that. So there's always that mistrust on going forward. So right now we're doing our land use planning. I bet you we've been at it for about 15 years now. And each year something seems to develop all the time. And the mining's still going on, and I mean the explorations are staking of claims is still going on, stuff like that. So we're still, there doesn't seem to be any holdback sometimes from the development perspective. And that's why we did our land use planning at the advice of our members, what protections they wanted around their areas where they were born, like each, like us, for instance, like the Baxters are around Makok, Quashie Lake and stuff like that. The Achinibanesh comes around Pim Island and all that, where that Ring of Fire is going to go. Things like that. So we talked to them, and we tried to provide protection as much as we can along the lakes and rivers with the tools that we have at our disposal at the moment. And I'm sure that more will come in the future. But like Karina said there, it's better to be part of a project, be part of something and moving forward, and put in our say, our members' say, on how they want it to look and how to move forward without just standing on the sidelines, as we've previously been doing, or just get run over, so to speak. So I think, any movement of any kind provides the positive and negative of any project. And it's when we come to those challenges that we have to really think about how best to go around those or to address them. Very good.
Miigwech. Just a follow-up, and I'll put it out to Rowena first. So we'll stay with the community perspective here for a few minutes. We've been through the MFCAR process. The EAIA is pretty much wrapped. What's your perspective on how the impact assessment on Aboriginal treaty rights and interests was done? How did the community feel about it? And what advice might you have for the Northern Road Link team as they're just really getting into it?
The impact assessment?
On Aboriginal treaty rights and interests, like that part of it. Like, I guess the question is, do they feel that the impact assessment is reflecting what the community feels are their rights and interests? And those are difficult words, but I think Bob's captured it very well. How people are using their land and how scared are they that things may not turn out the way they want, and how much control do they have over being able to control that outcome? Do the community members at Martin Falls feel that there has been good reflection of their interests in the EAI? I think that's really the question.
Well, the EA just came out, so I don't think they had enough. Most of the community hasn't read it yet, with it like just being released a week ago. So, but
I guess I'm getting more at, the chat around the community, right? And whether or not, like Bob, you put it so well, we're usually getting run over. We're usually on the sidelines. We're usually from the outside looking in on our own projects on our own territory. So we've wanted to do it the other way on all three of these projects. Mm-hmm. And I know the EAIA, the 1,000+1 pages, somebody said it was 1,000+1, is just out. Mm-hmm. But how many community members are actually going to read it? So the question is, as they've been going through the process, is there still that fear in the community that there's the outside looking in perspective, or do people feel that they're being reflected in the process as it's gone on, irrespective of what's in the document itself?
Well, it's hard to speak on what other people think or feel, but I believe we've got enough varying perspectives. Like there's a lot of concerns about the road coming in, but there's way more positive effects that will happen. So we all have our worries that it's going to bring in more, like say more drugs and alcohol. But we've already have that in the community. It's not going to, like the difference isn't going to be that much. So, but in the positive it's going to bring is increased access to healthcare. Basically, in case there's an emergency, we really need to stop relying on planes. They're not that reliable. Like, it's completely dependent on the weather. Like, so yeah, I think the community is all for it for the most part. I don't know what more to say.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. Yeah, it's I always found very difficult, and I'm sure a lot of you know when we go to meetings, sometimes in our own community, not all members show up. Not just on First Nations communities. I see that in municipalities too. That when you do have projects that go through, and you want to have a community meeting, whatever interest that if people are interested, they show up. If not, or if they had other commitments, they don't show up. So it's been a challenge. But I think a lot of them just like the one lady that stood up here yesterday after when we were discussing the road to Martin Falls, and she stood up and came right up here and started pointing to where her trap line was, and what kind of, just basically asking what's going to happen to that area, and is there going to be compensation and stuff like that for that. So there is a general interest from each. What I find from each, I guess the word for that is the clan. The clans that used to, the families that used to stay in certain areas, and that's where they're brought up their children and stuff like that. So they're very interested on those aspects of that area. And what Dorina was pointing out too, like when we'd have these meetings, like the main concern, one of the main concerns, of course, is the influctuation of population of Native people, or coming up once the road is built, and drugs and alcohol that come with it, and the policing of the road, and who's going to own the road, stuff like that. So there is people are concerned. It's not like they don't know what's going on. They're in their own way, that they have their own concerns if you talk to them one by one.
So that's a perspective from Martin Falls First Nation, and of course there's a lot of other communities in the room that may not be quite as close to where the road is actually going to be located, but may have experience or be concerned about potential impacts to their own Aboriginal rights and interests. So we have to reach out. But this is it's a really good, thank you for your comments. It gives us a good grounding in what this is really all about. Now we're going to turn our attention a little bit to the more technical aspects. So we all heard you, Bob, that these processes always turn to be very technical, and for all good reasons. The regulators have to have the right information. We have to know what the scientific parameters are, for sure. And it's up to people like Mark and Michelle to work within those technical parameters in terms of taking information that they're provided and conducting assessments. And as you pointed out, Rowena, they're ultimately going to have to go back to the community and say, did we reflect this properly? We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, but I want to get a little bit of a more technical perspective. So let's talk a little bit about what it takes, like what are the information inputs that are required in order to be able to conduct the impact assessment on Aboriginal treaty rights and interests, specifically the way the TISG and the provincial response to the TOR were provided. So it is the checkbox stuff, but we do have to go through that. And again, we'll talk about community validation a little later, but we'll start with you, Michelle. Tools, information inputs, what do you need to be able to conduct that assessment?
Miigwech. It's been a really interesting time being up on this panel and listening to Rowena and Bob share their experience. The thing that came to me, especially yesterday when we were presenting on the project overview on the Northern Road Link, and I got a chance to stand up there and speak to it. We've, launched what I think is a very innovative tool, which is the Indigenous Knowledge Program. The goal of that program is to understand what communities want to share in terms of their rights and interests, information that they want to collaborate with us on, and how they want to undertake that collaboration, and essentially provide inputs into how we're setting those baseline conditions. Yesterday up there, and I think there's a copy of our presentation back there as well, we showed a diagram where we have this Indigenous knowledge aspect, and we talk about the tools we have. So that means existing information that communities want to share with us, So it could be, things that they've done internally, whether it's through, as Bob mentioned, maybe they were undertaking their own community land use plan, community-based land use plan process. Maybe it's information that comes from previous projects that they've been part of. So that kind of existing knowledge base is what we're hoping communities are willing to share with us. What we're also doing to kind of address where we don't have that access to that information, or we're still working on building those relationships with communities, is things that have been published. So, if there's census data out there, or there's certain community well-being indices that we have access to, or any maps or information that's out there in communities. I know in previous discussions with communities, a lot of them have told us to go to the Hudson Bay Archives. Like there's information there that would be potentially can be part of our process. So those are the inputs that we're relying on in terms of existing knowledge base, and those go into our baseline conditions. As I mentioned, for the Indigenous Knowledge Program, another aspect is if there's project-specific information. So for the Northern Road Link, we developed these study areas. We went back to the communities, sought their feedback on those study areas, and then we updated those study areas. So information related to information that the communities find important and want to share with us, and well, any information, to be honest, like that they're willing to share with us and want to see as part of our process. Those are information that can be project specific, that communities can participate with and collaborate with us on. I also want to mention, and I think we have usually, like when we have our open houses and when we have events, we mentioned that we have field monitoring programs, and we have community members that actually go out into the field during the field season with our monitoring teams, or and work with us as well. So even that information, validated by the communities, can potentially make its way into our baseline conditions setting. And we'll speak to it a little bit later as well. It's not just the baseline conditions setting, and setting like what is the existing landscape. It's also about when we are talking to communities, and I mentioned like information that they're willing to share is information that we will consider as part of the process. And some of the communities have in the past shared mitigation measures that they want to see, or how we're addressing this aspect or that aspect of it. In the presentation yesterday, I also mentioned that we showed a diagram that had Indigenous knowledge in the middle, and then all our value components for all our disciplines around it. And those are all considering information that communities want to share with us, and we're putting it through our process and weaving it through the different disciplines and value components. And then also some of the communities have given feedback that's related to project design. So all of that plays a part into inputs that we're hoping the communities are willing to share with us. Thank you, Chimedwich.
That's good, Mark. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Michelle was talking a lot about the baseline and how we're putting information into the baseline that's coming from communities, and I think Michelle touched on how we try to work through this regulatory process in a way that keeps the assessment real to the communities in terms of what we mean by baseline, what we mean by effects assessment, pathways, mitigations, all these technical terms. We're trying to make it as kind of grounded and accessible as possible so that we can get the input, because the the ideas and the understanding is there. It's just this technical language that we need to remember that everyone apart from working in EA's full time might not recognize these terms.
Thanks, Mark. Can we stay with you for a minute? We're talking here about input into the assessment. And then, of course, you have to actually do the assessment. And you have to take all the information that's provided to you from all these different sources. And one source that I would like you to address is the actual boots on the ground, the field work, people actually out collecting information with community members, because I think that's an important element of the input. But taking all of that and then following along, you mentioned about the pathways yesterday, Mark, maybe you can give us a sense of how you go from that baseline, that bushel basket full of information, and move it through the assessment process to address the potential impacts to Aboriginal treaty rights and interests.
Okay. Well, I don't want to get into the weeds too much about the technical assessment, but the way that we were talking about it yesterday in terms of, we're really trying to talk about change. And Bob was mentioning how, when you introduce an activity or a project in a community or on the land, there's going to be changes. There's going to be movement, and those changes can be positive and they can be negative. And in many cases, they might be positive to some parts of a community and negative to others, or positive to some communities and negative to others. And so what we try to do is look at a clear and accessible way of presenting what that change can look like. And it could be, taking some simple examples. If you're, doing a science experiment and you have, you add some ingredients and you mix them together and then you end up with something else. And we try to look at how those, what changes are going to take place and what you end up with afterwards. So, the environmental assessment language, I think, originated more in a science environment. And, what we're talking about here in terms of how communities can be impacted, and how communities can have their social services, their economic livelihood, their health affected by projects, and then also the Section 35 rights. How do these projects affect things that are of interest and importance to communities? And so we kind of take a similar model where we're thinking about those changes, but what we need to do is really fit our understanding into how the community views its how the values of the community are expressed. And from there, we look at having a flexible approach and a holistic approach to how rights can be affected. And so for the projects that we've been working through, it's important to look at it holistically in terms of it's not just about how communities might be affected doing hunting and fishing or trapping, but it's also about well-being of communities and how rights can be expressed when community conditions are not good and or lacking in some ways or needing to be enhanced in some ways. So we're looking at it from a holistic perspective where we want to understand what are the effects first on communities from these projects, and then looking at through a lens of an umbrella of rights that are held by Indigenous communities and how those rights can be affected adversely, negatively by these projects. So we are working through this complex process, but it's in a way that we want to really kind of draw out how communities understand important values and look at how those can be impacted first, and then we look at how the rights are affected.
Michelle, I'm going to pick on you, and it's not in one of the prepared questions. So I've been in a number of engagement events, including the previous ATRI forums and the road gatherings, and I've heard a lot about the potential for the project to affect fish and water. Really, I mean, you could pick a number of different elements, but to use those as examples, I think everybody is familiar with the term of two-eyed seeing, and what we try to achieve with two-eyed seeing is to conduct assessments of potential impacts, identify potential mitigation accommodation, using inputs from the community perspective as well as inputs from the Western scientific perspective. And I've been very lucky in my career to have been able to see significant collaboration between the community understanding of the biophysical environment, like the fish in the water, and the scientific understanding of the fish and the water. And it's a really cool thing to see people come to an understanding that how I see this and how you see this are very similar. Now we can start talking about mitigation and how to actually address things. So I'm going to put the finger on you. If you could talk a little bit about when I mean pathways, there's been thousands of hours of data collection, and we'll use MFCAR because it's the furthest along, trying to understand from that two-eyed seeing perspective what impacts are going to be to the resources in the that the community relies on. How do you take all that back to the very end when you're doing your assessment and you're looking at whether or not you need to mitigate an impact and how so? Like, you know, from boots on the ground through to that assessment.
And I think it's a good follow-up to what Mark was speaking to. You know, when we do outreach with communities, and it can happen in many ways, whether the communities come to the table or bring us to their table, or you know, or provide us this information based on you know, things that Rowena has done with community with Martin Falls is host their own sessions and map information out and then provide it to us in sometimes what we call an aggregate format, where we get to see shapes of these are where activities have happened, these are how the activities are undertaken. We take that information back and we put it on our own internal protected maps, and we work through it and overlay, what we know from that Western science perspective of what the potential for impacts could be on fish. So whether it's talking about a water crossing or it's talking about spawning areas, we look at that information that communities have provided to us. I also like to call, sometimes, depending on the communities we're working with, we call that indigenous science. Like that's the scientific perspective that we need to include into our process. And it's also the perspective that's driving our process here. Like these are very innovative projects because I know Bob doesn't like that word community-led, but they're led by Martin Falls and Webakwe. Like they've come together and said, this is how we want to do this. So what that means and how that reflects is that we carry that, for example, the fish information in through our, what you've called and what we've spoken to before, what we call technically the pathway of effects. So we look at, what would be the effect on fish because of a potential water crossing that's going to happen. How do we, using that term again, mitigate it? So what could that, how do we plan for it? How do we go back to communities and say, this is how we're addressing your concerns? Does this work? And then we put that, after that mitigation, we still look at if there are any leftover effects of that process. So we work through all of those, and once we've kind of addressed or laid it out, we then look at how that could potentially impact a community who does active fishing in the area, or who, if it's not fishing, then trap lines or other examples that have been used previously. So we work through all of that to then lay it out, and as Mark spoke to it, like holistically see what is the impact going to be on a community. We, depending on where the projects are, I know Northern Road Link is not as far as Martin Falls Community Access Road or the Webakwe Supply Road. But depending on where we are, we go back and validate information with the communities, or we know that this is the bigger picture. This is what we believe would be the potential impact on communities. I want to mention one other thing that you spoke to, where communities are leading that process themselves. I think a lot of us at this table, the communities are very focused on how they are impacted or potentially impacted positively or negatively by these projects. For those of us who've had experience working on multiple projects, and there's a lot of community representatives here too who are, at capacity and working on multiple projects as well. We have a sense now, working with communities, understanding some of those perspectives, that the process has to be fulsome, holistic. It's not all rights and interests can be put in specific boxes. They are the whole ecosystem. So we try to address that as much as we can. And where we identify gaps, we try and go back to the community to help us understand those better. So, thank you, Chimagwich.
Bob, now I'm going to pick on you. We got a good grounding from the community perspective when we got the conversation started. We have a better understanding from the technical analytics side, how hard they're trying to reflect community in their assessments for the regulatory process. The projects, well, at least MFCAR and WSR are very, very close to being completed, the EAIA processes. And as we all know, there's going to be 120 days for review. And obviously, one of the key questions is, did the analysts get it right? So you have your EA, your IA, it's 1,001 pages, lands in a small truck in the community. You hire consultants or you don't, and you review the document. What's going to be the process on the community side for reviewing the EA and giving a grade to the analysts as to whether or not they actually achieved the objectives we've been hearing this morning? Holistic, inclusive, two-eyed seeing. Somebody from the community has to say, yeah, I think that's pretty good, you did a pretty good job, or you didn't. What do you foresee as the process for going through that review? Some might call that validation, right? So information was provided. Did the community, the project team, the technical team, use the information in a way that reflects the community? I don't like the word validation, but I think you understand what I'm asking.
You know, this project that we're on, this path that we're on this all season road, all this stuff that's involved with it. You know, to really understand where the First Nations are coming from, you have to walk into their shoes, you know, to really understand them. You have to go to their communities and live with them and talk with them and see how they live, what their inspirations are within their community, because each community is different. They have different, they have different visions of how they want to proceed within their own community. And with the tools that were provided to us, and with all that stuff that we've gathered, all that data and technical and indigenous knowledge, we try to compile that in a way that we deliver it to the community in the context that they will understand it. And it's very complex to me, because I always want to reach out to each and every one of our members. And when I mentioned before, when I go to a community meeting and only about a handful of our members show up, and I ask my co-workers that I work with, I always question them, and I tell them I don't feel right that we can put this in a report and say we engaged with the community when we about 900 members in our community, and only a few handfuls show up. Is this how we make our decisions on moving forward? So we try our best to, I always voice that, because I want them to understand, really, truly understand where we're going, with the things that we do, and where they are with it. Are they on board with it? Stuff like that. So, it's gatherings like these sessions that we have in our community meetings, and however we can reach them, either through newsletters, radio, mouth-to-mouth, Facebook, stuff like that. And you don't always get feedback. You get some feedback, but you wish you had more. Just the way I hear now, like you're here because we want more feedback. And but like I said, to really truly understand the aspirations of the First Nations people, this is my personal feeling about it, because I've lived on First Nation, on reserves and stuff like that, and And it's knowing, it's being with them. You can see, that's where you know what First Nations people are all about, and how they really feel about the land that they live in. And I've seen some cases, like, I'll give you an example. Maybe this is not one, but some of our members marry first non-native people. I had the chance to meet one a few years back. And this non-native had a full understanding of what Native people are all about. He even spoke the language better Ojibwe than I did, because he lived with the community, he lived right in the community. And that's how it's like all over. You know, if you go into a French community, you're gonna have you'll be speaking French in no time. It's being part of that. Just being part of that nation building, if you want to call it that. But there's a lot of work to be done. You know, a lot of work has been done, but it's, you know, I don't find it perfect. I don't find it a perfect system. It's got flaws. And I think through the years, from what I've seen through the years and working with, you know, as time evolved and you know, different generations come up in our membership, and I don't like to talk bad about my dad, but my dad was a chief of Martin Falls one time, and he was invited to a NAN conference one time, and he was telling us about it. He says, they asked me a question of what, you know, how to proceed. These young people were asking me how they see us in the future. My dad was usually very blunt. He said, to this point, I think as old leaders, we kind of effed up, was the word he used. And it's up to you people to pick up where we left off, where we made our mistakes, and keep moving forward. And I think that's what I see now, as our young people are growing up, and the leadership that's there now have more understanding, and they have more, you know, they see that they have their rights. You got to remember, if you want to talk about treaty, this is not just getting into the out of subject here, but you got to understand, you know, when some of these treaties were signed by the federal and the provincial government when they did come in. Like we were just told not too long ago, these before these treaties were signed, the federal and the provincial government already had the treaty all made up. And whatever it is going to be in that treaty was made by them. It wasn't that with the consultation of the leaders at that time. And I think Ontario was the one that was and organization that moved it to where it would benefit their interests, and not to the First Nations people. So that's the groundwork that we're working with. Right from the beginning, that mistrust from the governments to obtain what they want for their own interests, not for the interests of the First Nations people. So I think it's crucial that we as First Nations people now, especially in this project that we're doing, that we really educate our people, what's going to come, what's happening now and what's going to come once this road is built. That we're not going to be left behind without the full say of the First Nations that'll be involved in all these projects that are coming up. And I think, like I said, that's why I say it's not a black and white approach. Like this, it's a complex issue, and I can't just say, okay, well, all the members of people understand and they're all okay with it. I can't say that at this moment, because there have been people, the older people, that said they like to see the land the way it is, because that's what they're used to. And the young people tell me, well, Bob, you're a trapper. Your ways of trapping are gone. We're not trappers anymore. We want freedom. We want freedom to just do what we want to do outside a reserve, stuff like that. So, and that's what we're looking at.
The break's at 10:30. I'd like to leave a little bit of time for input, questions, comments from the room. But I think it's important to ask one more question. And I'm going to put it to you, Mark. A lot of people in the room that are involved in the MFCAR and WSR projects are asking, what's next? What happens now? So we've been through the process. We've got the community basis. We've done our best to try and reflect as analysts what the communities are telling us. Bob's giving us good guidance as to what community-led really should mean, what the purpose is, and for the good of the people. But people want to know what's next. And I guess one of the questions I would have is, we talk about net effects, right, which is a technical term, which means we've mitigated to the extent we can, and there's still some residual concern. When you add all of those up, and when you look at all the mitigation measures that are applied, how are the community members going to know you're going to actually implement those mitigation measures? Where do we go? What commitments do we make to the communities?
So we were hearing a little bit about this in the breakout rooms yesterday as well, where some communities were asking, how will there be follow-up, and taking the 1,000 pages of the EA report and asking community members to understand, these the commitments that are kind of sprinkled throughout the 1,000 pages is not realistic. And what we want to do is really plug into where communities are at. With Webequie Supply Road, we have, the proponent is Webequie First Nation, and we have a lot of input, and we've, heard a lot from Webequie, especially but also a lot of other communities where we've heard about needs of communities, opportunities that are being proposed as part of the project. And so what we've been working on is taking the outcomes of these assessments, where we say, a negative could be, say, on community infrastructure, say a road needs to be upgraded, or the risk of drugs and alcohol more coming into the community could have a negative effect, or looking at, say, additional education and training and employment readiness will be a benefit to the community to actually take advantage of the construction and operation of the project and the future. And so we're creating a community readiness plan. I don't know if it will be called that eventually, but it's basically taking these commitments and moving them kind of into a planning space where you can talk to communities about talk to the communities, but also kind of plug into the community in terms of where concerns came from, and how, once a project like the all-season road were constructed, you would say, this is how the community is planning to get ready for the project. And so you might look at safety in terms of vulnerable groups, with workers from outside communities coming into the community. You might look at road safety. You might look at positive things like economic development planning, procurement planning, so you can look at getting contracts and exploring, how a business might be created to fill a contract, training youth for the right jobs. So we've got a list of these plans that are going to be all part of what we kind of propose, and what we will really be looking at in terms of talking to communities and actually kind of getting that input from the communities, and really having those plans be the community's plans. But they're all tied into commitments through the environmental assessment. So that's one thing that we've been working on, and like as an example with Webequay, Webequay's done a lot of community planning apart from the road project, and so we've tried to align these plans with their previous planning so that it's really part of their community plan. And that's what we'd be looking at doing with all communities where they, raise an interest about employment or procurement or traffic or environmental monitoring. We can build those into the overall commitments of the project. Thanks.
That's great. I'd like to thank all of the panelists. Some really good insights. We have a few minutes for questions. We have a mic that's available. If you have a question, put up your hand. Mr. Spence?
Rigat dina het skiniga abamu dojeniga bakokadonic. Actually, we are concerned about the engagement process that is being put up by the guidelines of the provincial EA. You know, I've been involved with my community leadership and governance since 1973. Community engagements and consultations been happening for various external interests, projects coming into the community, departments and services. We've been dealing with the same people, same amount of people. Maybe the biggest number I could count on is the biggest number we've been community participating is probably 30 or 40 of 800 people. We are different as a Anishinaabe people. Our governance inherent laws is different. Where's my buddy? He's supposed to help me here, back me up. Just kidding. We are different. We are not the European or currently any kind of a system. We are different. We are truly inherent, empowered by the natural laws, government system. Our leaders were our grandmothers, advisors, and they chose the leaders to what they think is those are the warriors that they can do the job for us, to feed us, to heal us, to doctor us. Today, we talk about the section 35.1 that was brought back to, we perpetuated Constitution April 17, 1982 by the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. So he made a big mistake. And we said no. We took opposition to that. And anyway, they just went ahead. In that one sentence says we are affirming and recognizing existing Aboriginal treaty rights in Canada. He made a big mistake. Okay, back to the ground. We have to look at this. And ahead of me, there's thousands of young people, 0-1 ages, and 5 to 10, and 20 to 30, and 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and 50 to 70 years old. Only a few of us. And they want to call us elders. They haven't given us a certificate yet. Haven't got any certificate as an elder to become an elder yet. Once I get a certificate, then I'll be shut up. They'll tell me, you're an elder. Shut up. Just kidding. Anyway, we have to look at this as the next generation. They would want a good government, a good governance, good education, social, economic, political, not external interference. They would want their own good livelihood. Again, or we knew what we had before. We knew that. We knew our process of our governance, our relationship with the external governments, institutions. We're supposed to be one in this country. Whatever you want to call it, to the island, Anishinaabe people, country, Canada, we have to be one. Work together. Our well-being for everybody. That's the goal we have to take. So what they're going to need? They're going to need a good economic program, economic every day. We need it, unless if there's a changes. So our livelihood is so important. We have to keep that. So the government was obligated to protect our Aboriginal treaty rights. Canada and the provinces and territories. Ontario. Ontario, that's your job. You must protect our Aboriginal treaty rights. As long as this, you know that. We're talking about this 40 years now. I've been involved in this 40 years and hearing and listening to the elders. And this is your right. You have a right to hunt. You have a right to equipment. You have a right to marry. Just kidding. It's a hard one. It's not an easy one. You look after somebody. It's a hard job. Half of your payroll, you go to that person. Every time you get a paycheck, and it goes to her. That's the way it's supposed to be. Men learn that one. You have to be respectful. I really appreciate your comments and what I hear from the panel. I really appreciate it. Miigwech, chmiigwech.
Miigwech Roy. So which is the harder job, being an elder or being a husband? Both. There's a question over in the corner.
Bonjour, my name is Russell, counselor for Martin Falls. Thanks for the information, and good to see everybody here. I do have some comments, not actually a question. I've been writing some stuff here, what the panel was talking about. In my community, as a leader, one of the leaders, I often see people coming in, government agencies, and they do a lot of interviewing, elders, young people. As far as I could remember, they've been doing that, and today they're still doing it. I don't know what they're looking for. Like they want to get the last word out of us, what they are looking for. The treaty, little bit of a I know treaty that was given to us by government, what Bob said was actually already there. But before that, we had our own treaty. We had our own exercise to practice our land, how to hunt, how to fish, how to make snow shows, all that, what we survive out in the land. Even before the hunting items came, like nets, rifles, we had our own. We had our own way catching the fish. and they used to do it in the mouth of the river or creeks where they to catch them. They used to call them fish trap. I remember seeing that when I was young, and it's pretty cute how they used to make it. I don't know if I would be able to make one today, but I saw it. But that was one of the best way to catch fish, and that was one of our treaty rights from the Creator. He gave us those teachings to use as a Anishinaabe people. Kigichina dagos in Anishinaabe, Kevin Manetono, Ogivito Kagun, and the Geshimad Sechuma King. Meswegegon Ogiminan, Ogiminegon, Ogina got two noid Manetu and the Gonjimad Anishinaabe. Umashkiman yen no coming o yontinan and the Gonjiman Mad Akosach. Egos Agi Pia joy de Agi Tagosh joy de our brothers. Me pan habit Tagegon Kiwanese Nishnabi Agi Kendasach. Kini bugegon kawanage maganika addictions nungong guys de kadamang. Miga ay jubisig nungong ugyaw jagi sigak kawaman namin isisewan. Ego tebo isinagon nigan. Nigan Chinabian no Gagishik and the Gezimanus said Nishnabe no Gamadisich and get out among and the Gishiganoman thing. Mission on Dagan gotting a sec. Kinan Ganishnabe, Gotengongi says Nonche Mamo, Mamo Noki Metin, Misha Bezica, Kamach Sek, and the Bagui say, Egag Munenagi with the Noki Magnets, Kunen Gamach Sek. Panama Shigas twin Chikito Damang Mamo. We took again. Magisha Bangi on the minister said Nigan. No, Gabaga Gwet the Arch. A Anishinaabe acknowledgement. Gabi George in the community. Gyomak Skuteo no get to the mod hydro. Giving all. Non community members' questions. Condaskions tunta sio guino ye pizza kagabam watcha sibin. Kon yunja bisasio nettam and Asian vending snabe. Tabisko to go treaty Boba Gikadacha Nibe Gunation Alkazisko when at Sigiogo when Gomash Bijaj and the community. Mia Bangia, Evita Bajimon, Kenigashi Kaja woman, the man in the community is Gegun, Gabachinagok, Chitagok, Windamagian, Skadisek Gina, but storage, Bemadson, Miguch.
Miigwech, Councillor. I think we'll leave it at that. Just about everybody in the room representing a project team would love to hear any other comments or questions that you might have, and we all kind of put them No, we're going to have to take a break, Wayne. Yeah, I know. Maybe we'll take some more questions after we finish with the next breakout sessions, because we're cutting those pretty close as it is. So I think we need to get the break. But like I said, there's plenty of project team members, and we're all working together, and all that information funnels in, so you can basically talk to anybody, and that information will get into the process. So I'm not going to gather everybody back together again. We're going to have a break. The breakout sessions you've all signed up for. If you need a refresher, there should be a schedule at the registration desk. They start at 11, as does the Expo. Both were really successful yesterday, so let's keep up the energy. And the breakouts will go till noon, and then we'll have lunch. So I'm not going to come back and urge you to go. Gather your community members, whoever's going to be going to the breakout sessions, and just make your way upstairs. Just for a reminder, to get upstairs, you go in behind this room towards the ballroom for people who know the Valhalla, and there's a set of stairs right by the ballroom doors, and that'll take you up to the rooms, and they're all marked. Yes, there's an elevator as well, just right here, actually, right behind the room. Okay, thank you. Miigwech.